My name is Vincent Okafor. I am a retired high school football coach and history teacher from Mobile, Alabama, and I want to start with the thing that shaped everything about who I was, because without it, the rest of this story does not make sense. I was abandoned by my father at the age of 7. He walked out of our house on a Tuesday morning in 1965 with a suitcase and a reason that was never adequately explained to me, or my mother, or my younger brother Calvin. He did not come back, not for birthdays, not for graduations, not for my mother's funeral in 1998, not once in 58 years. I am telling you this at the beginning rather than the middle because the entire architecture of my life was built around that Tuesday morning. And what I was shown in January of 2023, when my heart stopped on the floor of a gymnasium in Mobile, Alabama, was the explanation I had been waiting for since I was 7 years old. The explanation did not make that Tuesday morning retroactively painless, but it made it, for the first time in 58 years, something I could set down. My mother, Della, raised me and Calvin on her wages from a laundry on Government Street in Mobile. She was constitutionally incapable of sitting still when there was something that could be done. She considered effort a form of prayer and applied that theology to every shirt she pressed and every dinner she produced from ingredients that should not have been able to produce what they produced. We did not have money. We had her. In retrospect, that was the better of the two available options. I played football at LaFleur High School well enough to get a partial scholarship to the University of South Alabama. I studied history because my 10th grade teacher made me understand that history matters not because it tells you about the past, but because it tells you about the forces shaping the present, and that understanding those forces is the closest thing available to freedom from them. I have never forgotten that. I taught it the same way for 34 years. I came back to Mobile and started teaching at Williamson High School in 1980, coaching varsity by 1986, 2 state championships, 2004 and 2011, 39 years at the same school. I tell you the championships not to brag, but to establish the framework. I was a man whose professional identity was built around getting young men to achieve what they did not believe they were capable of. The abandoned child became the man who did not leave. I can see that pattern now. I could not see it from inside it. I was married to Gloria for 39 years. Gloria was a labor and delivery nurse at USA Health University Hospital for 32 years, and she had, as a result, a relationship with the beginning of life that informed everything else about how she understood the world. She believed that something deliberate was happening in every delivery room she had ever stood in. I used to tease her about this with the affectionate skepticism of a man who found her theological convictions charming, but not personally applicable. I do not tease her about it anymore. I need to tell you about the anger because it is central to what I was shown. The anger about my father was not something I wore visibly. I was a football coach. I had spent 31 years being the stable, demanding, present authority figure for young men who needed one. The abandoned child had built an entire career compensating for the template he had been handed. That was genuine, and I am not diminishing it. But underneath it, maintained with the care that only a lifetime of practice produces, was a specific quality of rage that had calcified over 58 years from the hot anger of a 7-year-old into something colder and more architectural, a load-bearing resentment that the entire compensatory structure of my life had been built on top of, and that I had confused with foundation. It is the 3rd Saturday in January of 2023. I am 65 years old and 4 years into retirement. I am at Williamson High School for an alumni basketball event, standing on the sideline of the gymnasium, drinking coffee, talking to my best friend of 40 years, Earl Simmons, my offensive coordinator for 2 decades, when I feel the coffee cup become suddenly very heavy in my hand. I know something is wrong before I can name why. The heaviness is not fatigue. It is the heaviness of a system that has abruptly redirected its resources because something more central requires them. I set the cup down with the deliberateness of a man buying himself a second to assess, and in that second a pressure arrives in my chest that removes the need for further assessment. Earl, who has been standing beside me for 40 years, says, "Vince," his voice already wrong. I say, "Earl, call Gloria." "Not 911. Gloria." Earl called 911 and then called Gloria, which was the correct sequence, and the sequence of a man who has known me long enough to understand that my stated preference and the correct action are not always identical. The gymnasium floor comes up with a patience I do not expect. Not a collapse, more like sitting down after the decision to sit has departed. I am on the floor where I stood for 39 years. The sounds of the basketball game continue around me. I can see the scoreboard from the floor. The score is 34-27. Those are the last specific details I retain from the physical world, for what the medical record will later indicate was 7 minutes. Then I am somewhere that is not the gymnasium floor. The first thing was the completeness of the piece. I am going to describe it in football coach language because that is the language I have. When you have coached for 30 years, you develop a physical memory of what it feels like when a team is running at its correct capacity. Every player in position, no friction, no misalignment. What I felt in that space was that quality extended to encompass everything. Not a team running correctly, existence running correctly, reality operating at its full designed capacity. The piece was not the absence of difficulty, it was the presence of everything functioning as it was built to function. I had no body. I want to note this as a former football coach with specific professional investment in the body as the instrument of everything that matters, because its absence was remarkable. No weight, no the accumulated physical invoice of 65 years of a frame that had played and coached and stood on Alabama sidelines. What was present without the body was more precisely itself than I had ever been able to be inside it. The light was everywhere, and it was alive in the sense that it responded. Not static illumination, a dynamic, attentive presence that I experienced as being known, completely, specifically, without the filters that ordinary human knowing passes through. It knew the football coach and the history teacher and the son of Della Okafor on Government Street, and the man who had been carrying the weight of a Tuesday morning for 58 years. It knew all of it, and it held all of it, and it loved me through all of it without revision. Then the showing began. There was a life review. Mine arrived organized and comprehensive, nothing omitted, with a quality of perception that included my own experience and the experience of every other person involved in every significant moment, simultaneously, both sides of every exchange present at once. The way a historian with access to all the primary sources can see the full complexity of an event that each participant only experienced from one direction. I saw the coaching from the inside of the young men I had coached. The specific experience of being a 17-year-old from a difficult household who encountered a man who showed up every day and did not leave. Knowing that the work mattered and feeling its weight from the receiving end are two completely different informational experiences. Feeling it from their side in that space had a completeness that 40 years of coaching had never provided. I saw the anger about my father. I felt it from my side, which I had been doing for 58 years. And then I felt it from Calvin's side. Calvin, who had carried the same Tuesday morning and had spent his life trying to talk to me about it in the way that younger brothers try, and who I had shut down with such consistent efficiency that he eventually stopped. That loss I had not fully accounted for. The review accounted for it in full, and then I was shown something I was not prepared for. I was shown the choice. What I was shown was a layer of the life I had not previously had access to. A layer that existed before the Tuesday morning in 1965, before the house on Government Street, before every event I have described as the formative architecture of my existence. What I was shown was that the architecture had been chosen. I understand how that sounds. I understood how it sounded in the moment of receiving it. What I was shown as direct experience, as seeing rather than being told, was that the soul operating as Vincent Okafor had, before this life, chosen the specific conditions of it, including my father, including the Tuesday morning, including the particular wound that would produce the particular work that would affect the particular young men who needed what I specifically had to offer. The soul chooses its curriculum, not arbitrarily, with the understanding of a consciousness that exists outside of time and can therefore see the full trajectory of a life before committing to it. The way a master teacher designs a course knowing that the most difficult material produces the most significant learning, and designs the difficulty because what the learning produces is worth the cost. I want to be careful not to make this sound like a tidy equation, because what I was shown was not tidy. And I want to say this clearly for anyone listening who has their own version of Tuesday morning. The people who hurt us are also responsible for their choices. What was shown to me was not that my father was blameless. What was shown was that the impact of his choice on my soul was something my soul had agreed to learn from, and that the specific shape of the learning, the abandoned child who became the man who did not abandon, the wound that became the work, was not accidental. It was the curriculum operating as designed. The hardest life lessons are not punishments delivered by an indifferent universe. They are the specific assignments of a specific curriculum designed for the specific soul receiving them, by a love so complete and so certain of that soul's capacity that it committed the soul to the hardest lessons because it knew, with the knowing available to something that exists outside of time, that the soul was capable, and that the learning would produce something that nothing else could build. What arrived with the force of a theorem being proved in real time was this: the curriculum is not punishment. The abandoned child was not a mistake. The abandoned child was the assignment, and the assignment had been agreed to. The weight released the way you release something you have been holding so long. You have forgotten that holding it was not the natural condition of your hands. My mother was there. Della, who had ironed shirts on Government Street and raised 2 boys on wages that should not have been sufficient, who had died in 1998 still not knowing the answer to the question, but who had lived as if the answer were sufficient anyway. That is the most extraordinary act of faith I have ever witnessed, and I was too close to see it while I was inside it. She communicated what she had communicated every day of my childhood. I knew you could carry it. I always knew you could carry it. My father was not there. I want to tell you that honestly. What was there, in the space where my anger about him had always lived, was something I did not have a word for at the time. The closest I can get is completion, as though the question open for 58 years had been closed, not by his presence or explanation or apology, but by the understanding that the completion did not require him. That was the freedom, not his apology. The understanding that the completion did not require him. I came back in the gymnasium, Earl's face above me, his hand on my chest, saying my name in the voice of a man who has been saying his best friend's name into an unresponding face long enough to be frightened. When I opened my eyes, he said, "Vince." I said, "Call Gloria." He said, "She is on her way." I said, "Good." A former player of mine named Antoine had retrieved the AED mounted on the gymnasium wall, a wall I had passed hundreds of times and never once thought of as personally relevant, and had used it before the paramedics arrived. I find that significant for reasons I will leave to you to interpret. 9 days at USA Health University Hospital. A cardiac catheterization revealed a blockage addressed with a stent. My cardiologist, Dr. James Whitfield, told me that the location and degree of the blockage, combined with the duration of the cardiac event, produced a statistical outcome distribution that did not generally include this particular conversation. I told him I had been somewhere specific and returned with specific instructions. He wrote something in his notes. Gloria sat beside me for all 9 days. I told her on day 2 before I had the right language because I did not want to hold it any longer. She listened completely and was quiet for a long time. Significant because Gloria does not process in silence when words are available. Then she said, "Vincent, the thing I have believed about every baby I have ever delivered, the thing you always smiled at when I said it." I said, "You were right." She said, "I know. I have been right for 32 years. I was waiting for the data to catch up." I called Calvin on day 4. Calvin, who had spent 50 years trying to talk to me about a Tuesday morning in 1965 and had eventually stopped. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Calvin, I need to tell you what I was shown." And I told him everything. When I finished, Calvin was quiet longer than I have ever heard him be quiet. Then he said, "Vince, I have been waiting 50 years for you to be ready for this conversation." I said, "I know. I am sorry it took this long." He said, "You were carrying it alone. I always understood." That phone call, from a hospital bed in Mobile to my brother who had been waiting 50 years, that is among the most important things I have done in my life. I could not have made it without the gymnasium floor. Here is what I want to leave with you. from a football coach and history teacher who was shown the design beneath the wound. The hardest thing in your life is not a mistake. It is not a punishment, and it is not evidence that the universe is indifferent to your suffering. It is the curriculum, the specific assignment of a specific soul that agreed, from a position of full knowledge and full love, to carry the hardest available lesson, because the love that designed it knew, before you had evidence to trust it yourself, that you were capable, and that what the carrying would build was worth the cost. The wound and the work are the same thing. The hardest lesson and the greatest gift are the same thing. The abandoned child and the man who did not abandon are the same thing. And the completion does not require the person who hurt you to explain themselves. It does not require their apology. It is available to you, right now, from exactly where you are standing. We are all in a curriculum. Every one of us, carrying our specific assignments, building from our specific wounds, the specific thing that only that wound could build. And we are all going home, eventually, to the love that designed the curriculum and has been watching us carry it with the patience of something that already knows how it ends. It ends in Calvin answering on the second ring. It ends in the weight finally set down. It ends in us being ready. We were designed for exactly this, and the designer has never once looked away.